while our fur grew out into a surprising pattern of yellow and black jaguar-like stripes. The witnesses helped us provision our ship. We watched our human pursuers board the shuttle that would take them to a world with more regular fold service to the rest of the galaxy. We asked the witnesses to give us the mark of the Curators, since they had all the genetic codes to do that. But they absolutely refused on the principle that they were not the owners of the mark. We had faked it before, though, so we made sure to stock some dyes that would work on our new fur. And the witnesses had no problem helping us with that. Witnessing aside, we were planning to spend a lot of our time camping on undeveloped worlds simply to avoid trouble. But while they were painting our ship, the feathered curator found us. "I hear you are looking for places to go to exercise your new freedom," it said. "I guess we're taking suggestions," M said. "I have one. You want a low-tech world where you won't be easily tracked. I know of one that's out of quarantine, but its development has been quite vexing to us. I am sending information to your computers." I watched the transfer progress. "That's a hell of a big file for a curator's index," I said. "I am including a language translation matrix. There probably won't be anyone on the planet who can speak common, and it won't cause a problem for you to expose your own human tech capabilities." "Wait, if they don't have anyone who can speak common, how do they trade?" "They don't. That is what we find vexing." At the direction of a witness who styled himself an artist, they painted our ship white on the bottom and a mottled blue and green camouflage pattern on the sides and top that he believed would keep it from standing out in most of the foliated areas of curated worlds. When we told them what we wanted next, there was a bemused search for an expendable glass bottle. With its shattering and a splash of wine, the old horsepill was rechristened from whatever our pursuers had called it to plausible deniability. "There are very few worlds in the galaxy where this would be thought to be anything other than a ground-to-ground transport," the artist said to us. "And for the most part, we don't have the human habit of naming ships or scheduling their comings and goings the way you do. So you should be able to slip in or out of most systems and just park it somewhere rural without attracting much attention." When we discussed this with the curator, it shrugged in its avian fashion. "To approach most worlds, I'd advise folding to the outer system, where their nanite-based fold drives won't have the range to detect your activity, and using the supergravity drive to close the distance. Nobody has the kind of radars humans do that would be alerted by the fast motion of a small object. But if you go to the place I suggested, you don't need to bother with precautions. They have no detection technology of any kind." "You never gave them the fold?" "Oh, we tried. You'll find out how that went. Oh, and another hint, and another reason we make this suggestion: you don't need to go to a lot of effort to pretend to have our mark." So a few months after we returned to the witnesses, we left them and M dialed in the coordinates of the world the feathered curator had suggested. From high orbit, the world seemed undeveloped. But from a bit closer in, we realized that there was an area about the size of Europe in its temperate latitudes that was dotted with obvious cultivated fields and towns. There were a couple of cities that might have had 10 or 20,000 inhabitants. There were roads, but they were earthen and difficult to detect even from low orbit. Finally, we settled on what seemed to be an agricultural suburb of one of the larger cities, and landed in a semi-wild area at the edge of cultivation. We wore our self-contained human tech translator pendants loaded with the translation matrix we'd been provided, and walked toward the nearest cluster of dwellings. When we got close, a female child noticed and approached us. She had fur too, but an even brown color, and she had a somewhat bear-like but much flatter snout. "Are you from off-world?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Is there a fold ship in the sky?" "No, we landed our ship over there." "Was it made by the tiny builders?" "No, if it was made by nanites, it would be the size of a mountain. My instructor says that only the tiny builders can make the fold drive. That's true for most people. But our people figured out how to make our own fold drives." "Would you tell my instructor that?" "The curators told our ancestors that was impossible. When the child turned around to lead us, I realized that she had no obvious mark anywhere on her body. But she did have a very old and prominent scar in the middle of her back in one of the places where the mark is often found." Her instructor turned out to be working out of what uncannily resembled a one-room schoolhouse. Inside, about 20 immature aliens of various ages were studying, and she rose when we entered. "Teacher, I met some aliens on the road." "My, that hasn't happened in a while. Nobody noticed a fold ship approaching, and they're very hard to hide. Ours is tiny. We make our own fold drives without using nanites," M said. "We were told this is impossible," she said. "The curators themselves made their own bodies into fold drives. Our technique isn't nearly as advanced as theirs, but it's much better than what you can do with nanites. You're obviously not from here, but I don't think I can believe this unless I see your craft." So much for keeping a low profile, I thought as we hiked back to the plausible. The little girl came with us. When we reached the ship, the instructor said, "This tiny thing is a starship." "Yes, show me." Inside, she regarded the computer screen skeptically, although the girl was thrilled. "We know the limits on these things," the teacher said. You are using the microfold for your translator and these displays, right? No, it's all self-contained. We are kind of hiding from our people. And why would you be needing to hide from them? We stole their starship, M said before I had a chance to tell the truth. There's only one way I will ever believe this thing can fly in space, she said defiantly. So I closed the hatch while M took the pilot seat. She took us straight up until the sky was black and the horizon very curved. Then she folded us out to the planet's moon. I hope you can get them home. There's no navigational aids down there, I said. I had the computer take visual waypoints on the way down. All my life I have been told that while this is beautiful, it is also a trap because if we accept the gift of the nanites, we would have no real control over them, and we would be giving our destiny over to the Curators. The ancestor who made that observation is considered one of our greatest philosophers, and he is widely honored among our people. But if your people really made this ship yourselves, we must reconsider some of our teachings. Our gravity plating is made of nanites, but only because what we can make ourselves is more expensive and doesn't work any better, so we just buy it from others. We made everything else ourselves, and most of it works better and gives us more control than what can be made with nanites. The Curators never offered us the gift of nanites, nor most of the other gifts their curated children receive. If they had given us nanites, maybe we wouldn't have gone to the trouble, but they didn't, so we did. Do you have any idea why the Curators denied you? Many of us are impulsive and violent. They thought we would be dangerous, and for a while we proved they might be right by overpopulating our world and killing ourselves by the millions in warfare. And how did that work out? Many of us, including too many of our leaders, can still be violent and paranoid, but we have improved a lot. We have expanded to colony worlds to reduce the population pressure, and adopted more reasonable population growth policies. And we have made peace with some in the galaxy by giving our technology to some races that had their own needs, which the Curators weren't meeting. Instead of taking us home, could you take us to a different place? There are people who need to hear your story and see this craft. For people who seem to be living a Bronze Age subsistence existence, their knowledge of geography and science was surprisingly complete. She easily guided us to a park in their capital city where a modest crowd gathered after watching our descent. The streets carried regular traffic of draft animals resembling oxen pulling carts made of wood and metal fittings. I realized that the female child was still with us. Won't someone miss her? I asked the teacher as we walked toward a large wood-frame building. I am her guardian while she is learning, and I can't think of a better place for her to be as you tell our leaders what you have already told me. The crowd was light, and we easily moved through it toward the council, 20 individuals sitting in a circle with no clear leader. Their chairs were fixed in place, a bit elevated, and there was space between them for aides and others to walk. We watched for a bit as an ornate baton was passed around. Only the member holding the baton spoke. The instructor left her student with us as she embarked on some kind of attention-getting protocol. Finally, the baton was passed to a new member who said, "We have alien visitors. I'm advised that we should put aside our ordinary business and hear their testimony while they favor us with their presence." All signal. Most of the members held their arms up, and we were nudged into the circle where we met the instructor again. "Greetings, visitors," the baton-holding speaker said. "Teacher Scree, it is good to see you again. I am told you will introduce our friends. As you know, there has been no obvious fold ship in our sky for over 30 years, so it was a surprise when my student Scree brought these individuals to meet me. They took me to their fold ship, which is not made of nanites and is barely 4 Scree long. They used it to take me to our moon to show that it is what they claim. They tell me that their people share our suspicion of the tiny builders, and that they found their own path to higher technology, which is in some ways better than that we could have ever attained by accepting the tiny builders. I know little more of their story than that, but I thought you should hear the rest. Then welcome, visitors. This is interesting indeed. Why did your people reject the tiny builders, and how did you manage to make your own high technology without them? The Curators never offered us the nanites or any other technology, I said. There was an audible gasp as the translator repeated this. The Curators decided our people were too violent and unpredictable, so they tried to hold us back. But we found our own way. Do you come here with violent intentions? No, but we do come here because others would do violence to us. We stole the ship we fly from them. We were advised that this was a world out of quarantine where our technology would not attract the notice of our pursuers. What was your offense? We accepted a gift from another race which they covet. They would do violence to try and take it from us. It's a long story. Let us keep for now to the story of your technology then. You are aware of the Curator gift of the tiny builders even though it was denied to you. Yes, 50 years ago our first experiments with the fold drive were noticed and we were contacted. Our ancestors, paranoid and suspicious as we tend to be, recognized that nanites were... The translator probably cannot handle that. That the nanites were elegant, but that their true intent was to maintain control over us. That is exactly the conclusion to which our ancestors came, the council speaker said. How did you manage to make a fold drive without the tiny builders? We had to discover agriculture on our own. Over thousands of years, we often went to war with ourselves over resources. That gave us a strong incentive to make better weapons, which meant learning metalworking. Then about 500 years ago, we entered an age of spiraling knowledge of science and engineering. We figured out the scale and extent and workings of the physical universe, and we built vast industries directed toward both war and trade. And one day we realized the fold drive was possible, and that it was within our capability to build it. So your aggression, which made the Curators cautious of you, was the very thing that allowed you to bypass their feathered leash. At what point did you begin to obliterate their mark? We didn't have to obliterate our mark of the Curators. The Curators didn't mark us. I guess they didn't think they had given us enough to justify it. There was an audible gasp from the crowd and some of the council members. That is unprecedented. An unmarked sapient species. Yes. What would you think the chances are that a peaceful race might learn your methods? Possible. We have already shared some of our methods with others, for things the nanites were not providing them. For war. No, to avoid it. The universe is full of resources, and after thousands of years of war, we now understand that there is no longer any reason to be in conflict over them. We are not in conflict with anybody. We are content. We are more knowledgeable than you might realize. There are a few races which visit us once in a while, and thousands of us have traveled the fold and seen other worlds. At this, a few council member hands went up. The speaker passed the baton to his left. My colleague speaks a common but not universal opinion. We are not in conflict, but we would also be helpless if others did decide they covet what we have. And we are stuck in place, dependent on other races to travel and learn. Would you be willing to share your methods with us? Em and I looked at one another. We would, she said. But starting from where you are, it would be a vast project. It took lifetimes for us to go from your current level of technology to the fold drive. Another energetic hand went up and the baton was passed. As a people, we are not afraid of work, and we will live our lifetimes whether we live them in endeavor or in stasis. Friends, are you planning to stay with us for a while? Yes, we have no other immediate plans. Please stay with us as we discuss this among ourselves. And if I'm not mistaken, this note I've been passed says that your little fold ship is in the courtyard out in front of our hall. Yes, it is. I really hope you won't mind then if some of us ask you for a ride. I have long dreamed of seeing another world up close. We took her and several other council members up about an hour later. Scree here has actually folded before when she was young and the last aliens visited us, one of her colleagues said with a snort. She just had to do it again. Could you show us one of the other worlds of our solar system? She asked. Easily. This is a starship. Em fiddled with the controls and within minutes we were looking over the horizon of a frozen moon at a gas giant. How did you match velocity? The counselor said with sudden sharpness. We have a device we call the supergravity drive which uses fold technology, but can't be made with the nanites the Curators provide. It can fold gravity from one place to another to accelerate us at will. Nobody has ever had this technology, she said flatly. We spent days falling toward worlds like that to do what you just did in a moment. Well, the Curators have it, Em said, and built into their bodies. We still can't figure out how they do some of the things that we've seen them do. But you are trying, the counselor said, and that is what we must now do. We were shown to an apartment a short distance from the council chamber, and our instructor and student were also given quarters. We all had dinner together on the ground floor where there was what humans would call a restaurant, except that there was no mechanism to pay the staff, and unlike on worlds with nanite technology, the food was all natural, and it obviously took non-trivial sapient labor to prepare. How are the workers compensated? Em asked as we were served. Our meal was a roasted small game animal dressed with vegetables. The witnesses had assured us that with our enhancement there was nothing obviously edible in the galaxy that would poison us. So we dug in, and it was exotic. Nanite food was good, but it was also extremely consistent and uniform, unlike an actual animal or plant. It occurred to me that Earth might well be the only other world in the galaxy out of critical path quarantine where such food was normal fare. They get to have done a job well, the teacher answered. Our way of life is such that there are far more of us than there are jobs needing to be done. So there is brisk competition for the privilege of doing that work we do need. There is greatly enhanced status in doing needed work. The more needed the work and the better your reputation for doing it well, the more enhanced your status. If we accept the challenge of raising your technology, there will be more work to be done than you can possibly imagine. I suspect that is one of the things the council finds attractive about the idea. While the council debated amongst themselves, Em and I had our own discussions. I know how to make a fold drive, but I don't know how to make a soldering iron, Em complained. I know how to calculate the stresses in a suspension bridge, but I don't know how to make a machine that could string its massive cables. I don't know how to make the machines that make the machines that make what I was taught to use. Same in medicine, I said. They are really held back because after nanites, all the Curators' further gifts assume the use of nanites. They have no chemical processes, even at small scale, and so all their medicines are natural. They're very smart about identifying and purifying them, but they don't have very good antibiotics and they regularly die if they attempt surgery. They would probably live half again as long as they do on average with even the medical technology of our own early 20th century. And I don't know any of that stuff either. It hadn't been taught for decades when I was in school because who uses a mortar and pestle when you can have custom molecules robotically synthesized and delivered the next day? We've got the basic encyclopedia on the pad we found, but it's not detailed enough. We need engineering references and textbooks. Old references that don't assume modern sources. You know there's only one place we can get those. And we can't go there now. The council debated for a couple of weeks while Em and I had our own arguments. I wasn't surprised when they formally asked us to help them raise their technology. At the same time, I was almost ready to walk back our offer, except that I'd also been talking to other natives about the issue, and at some point someone told me that it had been 70,000 years since they rejected the Curators' gift of the nanites. 70,000 years of children and old and unlucky people dying of curable diseases and treatable injuries. 70,000 years of reading by candlelight and farming with draft animals and knowing there was a galactic civilization but being excluded from it. 70,000 years of bodies stacked like cordwood and dreams tossed in a river of pride. What could you say to such a situation? It would be our honor to help you, is what I said. We still have to get knowledge for them. We don't have the training to raise them from this point to where our own training becomes useful. I have to go to Earth, I said heavily. You can't go to Earth, Em said very flatly. Of course I can. There's nothing to stop me except the fear of what might happen to me if I'm noticed there. But I've realized in the last few days that with this fur, which we asked for so we could pass unnoticed among aliens, we look more like aliens than humans. I won't go back to Earth as myself. I will go as an alien. We can go. No, you need to stay behind in case I fail. You might have to figure it out the hard way, but at least you know the endgame. You actually know how to make a fold drive. I have a pretty good idea what I have to do, and our assets have continued to increase at regular interest as we've gotten older. We're fairly wealthy and should be able to afford what we need. If you draw on those accounts, you won't be an alien anymore. If anyone has tracers on us and you know they do, that will draw them right to you. Well, we don't have anything else, and I consider it a thing we have to do. In the end, she relented. For her, as a technologist, she saw a society that was stable and harmonious. For me, as a doctor, I saw all kinds of preventable illness and death. We agreed on a plan. She would fly me to Hyacinth, which had regular trade with Earth via their landable fold ships, which eliminated the orbit-to-ground transfer bottleneck. And I would rendezvous with her when I had gotten what we needed. None of the alien worlds seemed to have what we could consider an economy, except in some kind of fantasy thought experiment. Even though I was from a non-existent race with no homeworld or resources, all it took was presenting at the terminal and making up an access code, and I had a birth of standard type 23, best suited for humans as well as a range of other similar species. I was early and 7 days were reserved for loading the ship, so I spent them the least conspicuous way possible, getting drunk and making small talk with the other passengers at the bar. Nearly all of them spoke at least a little common. I was very careful to be coy about my own origins. I quickly learned that this is actually a thing among the aliens, and claiming to be from a quarantined world was an accepted way to answer none of your business to the question, where are you from? It also isn't unheard of for typically unmodest aliens to wear codpieces to protect their more sensitive bits. And that was good because with a little makeup on the bare skin of my face and hands, those bits were my most obvious human tell. After 2 days, I returned from the bar to find my old acquaintance, the human form curator, in my cabin. I can't believe my cover is already blown, I said dejectedly as I sat down on the bed. Only with us, and your secret is safe with us, he said. I heard you were drinking that swill they served down at the bar and thought you might prefer a real drink. He pulled a fifth of Johnny Walker Blue from a brown paper bag and I got us cups. So how are you here? Our associate here noticed your arrival. Unscheduled fold activity. And she could tell it wasn't a nanite fold drive or one of ours. She guessed correctly that it must be human and contacted me. The ship schedules made it obvious what you were up to, and so we did a local aerial drone search and found your ship. It looks awfully familiar but doesn't have the same fold drive it did back in the day. Long story, I said. So we contacted our associate on 829166. I have to wonder why you are risking so much to help them. I told him. Have you asked yourself who will do all the work of recreating your technology? I don't know. Maybe they will decide it's not worth the bother. But they don't have billions of people to feed and fight. They can focus their energy on what they decide is important. There's only one way to find out. He poured us another round. Jay, there is something I need to tell you about your own people. I know you wonder why we denied you the gifts and our mark. I had long given up any hope you would ever explain that, I said. There have been talks at high levels among my people. I know you have noticed that only Earth humans use money. Even your colonies don't, because they had to be nanite-based to get them developed so quickly. We meant nanites to create what your people call a post-scarcity society. Nobody needs to want for any necessity of life on a world with a robust nanite infrastructure. There are exceptions, like the raiders on their low metallicity world, which poorly feeds the nanite infrastructure. But for the most part, it works. This is a very, very old design. Older by half than your own planet. Okay, so why deny us? In order for it to work, all of our children need a mechanism to avoid ruinous overpopulation. We usually apply this when we apply our mark, and the most common form is for either fertility or libido to decrease in a high population situation. The hyacinth are proud of their skyscraper, but those who spend a lot of time in it are finding that they need to move to the country for a few years if they want to reproduce. And it's long been understood that the long-term crews of fold ships don't tend to reproduce. We don't have any limitations like that. No, not like that. Several 100,000 years ago, when it became clear your ancestors might enter the critical path, it was unclear that our usual methods would sufficiently curb your aggressive tendencies. But one of us made the calculation that for your race, the population-limiting control could be war. There was no need for us to do anything, and no danger that you would develop high technology and make wider trouble due to the constant disruption of your own nascent civilization. I think your colleague got that wrong, I said carefully. We have rarely been so spectacularly wrong about anything in all of our history, he said. We were confident we had it right when your Roman Empire collapsed, as we expected. But when the Renaissance occurred, we were completely surprised. At that point, your technology became driven by your impulses to war and greed, and advanced far more quickly than we had ever seen. Capitalism brilliantly exploited your own worst tendencies to drive your expansion. Watching your progress for the last few hundred years has been like watching an explosion that builds more things than it tears down. It defies everything we thought we knew about growth and civilization. Most of our children take thousands of your years to progress from steam power to the fold drive, even with nanites to make it easy. You did it without our help in the blink of an eye. I extended my empty cup and he poured us another shot. Jay, why haven't you named 829,166 inches? I'm trying to keep a low profile, and I noticed a while back that when I name something, it tends to attract attention. Your hosts aren't on the microfold, though, and your secret is safe with my people. We are intensely curious as to how you will pursue this. Prometheus, I said. That isn't quite right, the curator admonished. You are playing the role of Prometheus, and the children of 829166 are playing the role of humans in this story. Still the closest I can think of. And Prometheans has a nice ring to it. All right. For the good of the Prometheans, you are going on a false identity to the most securely watched, paranoid, identity-obsessed, and technologically advanced world in the galaxy. You'll need money. Em and I have money. Money that is linked to your real identities. The people who covet what the witnesses gave you will trace that in half an hour. He produced a credit chip. Use this instead. We are old and have vast resources too, and if they try to trace that money, they will back off in a hurry. My people will consider you good for the loan. I was a bit worried about that, I admitted, and I accepted another shot. I don't know how to thank you. Thank us by making it interesting. My ability to monitor you on Earth is limited these days. If your mission goes south, I may be able to help, but I can't promise anything. We honestly want to find out what you can do with the Prometheans. We think we know what happened with humans now, but what you are trying on 829166 is similarly unprecedented. I would not be the one to predict that it can't work after what your own people did. He left the bottle and I finished it off. We were still 2 days from folding. The first mission of the landable giant nanite ship Laputa had been the diaspora of New Orleans, and M had learned quickly that landing was not actually necessary or indeed even a good idea. The supergravity drive only took about 25 watts of power to keep the vast ship hovering. The only problem was that the spherical supergravity field intersected the ground and created a zone of 0G under the ship. Laputa hadn't even taken on the first of New Orleans' world-famous conventional foundation houses before adventurers had started to explore that space. The nearly identical Hyacinth ship that took me back to Earth didn't have a name, but it did use the same technique. By convention, the first landing was always as close as possible to New York City, but that still meant about 100 miles away for a ship of this enormous class. But the ship then made rounds, and I got off at Stockton, California, where an area of desert that had once been farmland and was now desert again had been designated a spaceport. Half an hour later, I was in San Francisco. Even with fur, it was hard to get used to being naked in a place populated with so many other humans. The codpiece that shielded my genitals didn't have straps. It actually clamped to my fur. It had been custom-made for me, presumably by Nanite Tech on the Fold ship. I also wore shoes, conventional earth plastic Crocs, which were recommended for those aliens they fit, and a little kit that took the place of a wallet, which, like my codpiece, clipped to my fur. My first, and I considered most important, visit was to an old and storied bookstore. I had been carefully pretending not to understand English and almost burst out laughing when the first clerk I met read the index card I showed him, which said, Galactic Common. Hey, Eric, we got an alien here who I think speaks that funny language you've been practicing for the last 5 years. Eric and I made formal common introductions, and then I told him, I seek knowledge of your early technology. Technology knowledge is restricted, he said carefully. I only seek old technology. Beginning. Fire, steam, potions. Discovery. Eric held up a finger and left. A few minutes later, he came back. Good news. Older than 50 Earth years is okay. You want the popular science section. I made a show of looking at my index cards. Reference, I said. I will have to ask about every book. Acceptable, I said. San Francisco has some of the most heroically complete used bookstores in the world, and the obsolete reference section he brought me to was exactly what I had hoped for. I homed in on the 43rd edition of the Handbook of Chemistry and Physics, published on over 3,000 pages of onion skin papar in 1961. It was a little moldy but perfectly readable. Thousands of man-years of experimental results were priced to go at about what the local Waffle Hut wanted for a pancake. I next added the Tool and Manufacturing Engineer's Handbook, another 4,000 pages of accumulated knowledge about the shaping of metals and the tools to shape them, more centuries of practical experience laid onto paper. They had a few copies of the Radio Amateur's Handbook, and I didn't want to go back into the vacuum tube era. But they had the 1977 edition, which was mostly about semiconductors at low power. M could bridge the gaps for the Prometheans on that one, and the propagation theory was timeless. I was pretty sure Prometheus's ionosphere would turn out to be similar to Earth's. I also snapped up the complete new electric library from 1967, because I thought the Prometheans might find themselves needing things like dynamos and motors, and it did a very 19th century job of starting at the very beginning for those things. I also went for books on mineralogy and mining and glassmaking, all necessary bridges to the lab where purified chemicals might be turned into electronics. In the end, I had enough books to fill a pretty hefty backpack, and it all cost less than dinner did at the nice restaurant where so many U.S. presidents have had dinner in Chinatown. Earl took his credit from the chip the Curators had provided and handed me my bag. Is there a place to go for old communication gear? I asked him. Here there is a place to exchange everything. Common didn't really have a word for buy, despite being what everyone considers a trade language. I followed the transit system with more skill than I really should have had to a large warehouse outside of Oakland. I have a large club of young I'd like to show radio, I said. Two-way, some distance. They have no common power source. You want QRP transceivers, he said, slipping into English. He disappeared into the back for a moment and came back with a wall-hanging package. Self-contained, low power, capable of very long distance, but only at some times. You will need a code like our Morse. I know of your Morse code, I said, affecting difficulty. That is what I seek. How many do you have? He consulted the computer. 53, he said. I'll take them all. He raised his eyebrows for a moment, then tapped the computer. You'll need a lot of wire, but not very heavy wire, for antennas. Also for power, you want solar with battery storage. The best propagation is at night here on Earth. That is good. This order would not fit in a backpack, but I had a delivery point. My next visit was in some ways my most important. They had a very professional salesperson who spoke Common better than I do. I have this, I said, and showed him a card that read TU. I need at least 3 copy machines and as much paper and as much supplies to print on that paper as it can carry, and off-grid power. A common request, he said. We don't just have the best fold drives here on Earth. We apparently also have the best paper and printers in the galaxy. You do know the copy machines are restricted function for alien export. They will make simple copies, but have no advanced capabilities, and have features designed in to discourage reverse engineering. I know of that, I said. Do you need color reproduction? No, just black and white. That makes things much simpler. This is the price of the monochrome copiers. How many do you want? The environment will be harsh, so 5 if possible. Not a problem. He punched at the terminal. If we go to 80% limit for your TEU at normal loading, this is your limit for paper and enough toner to use it up with your printers. He swung the screen around, and I had to reorient because it was formatted for my convenience in Common, a language I found hard to read instead of English, which was natural for me. But I managed to make sense of it and hit the accept key. Off-grid, you will need a kilowatt-class self-contained solar power station for each copier. I don't sell those, but call on these people, they do. The next day I met everyone at the shipping container and watched them load it. The copy people were first, and they brought a forklift. Shortly after, as scheduled, the radio people arrived with the radios, wire, small solar panels, and batteries, which were also heavy enough to require some loading effort. Then the serious solar people arrived with equipment that could power my copiers for a reasonable duty cycle in good weather. Finally, I secured the books, and I locked but did not seal the container. I was on Earth for 9 more days, whether I wanted to be or not, thanks to the regular schedule of the Hyacinth trade ship, and I might think of other things to toss in before I sealed it up. I decided the least conspicuous thing to do would be to act like a tourist. So I walked across the Golden Gate Bridge, had martinis at the top of the Mark, and toured the California Academy of Sciences, where there was a prominent exhibit about Earth's early fold project with pictures of M, myself, the grasshopper, and an entire room devoted to the few documents I'd preserved about the world destroyed by a fold drive. I attended adult night at the Children's Science Museum, and had to politely decline several offers of companionship by both human sexes. With 2 days to go, I returned to my hotel room to find the human form curator waiting for me. "This can't be good," I said. "It's not bad yet, but I think it will be. It would be best if you leave Earth now. My container hasn't been unloaded yet, and the fold ship doesn't leave for 2 days. Yes, they've been stalling unloading your container, and that's our first bad sign. Fortunately, it makes this easier. Come on, let's get this done." He held out his hand, and when I grasped it, I found myself standing next to the container in its staging yard. "This one is yours, right?" "Yes." Still clasping my hand, he touched the container, and moments later we were on Prometheus. "How the hell?" he answered by raising his shirt to reveal an amplifier belt. "My people have taken an interest in the Prometheus situation. It is something we have been unable to fix on our own, and we are grateful for your help. I need to collect M and her ship before she is noticed on Hyacinth." He disappeared, and within 5 minutes the plausible deniability appeared next to the container. The curator had used his belt rather than the plausible's fold drive to transport it. "Hyacinth space is jammed with Earth fold drives pretending to be there for something other than finding you," the curator said as he followed M off of her ship. "They'll know there was activity, but they won't be able to follow what I just did." "So how long do we have?" M asked. "You should be safe until you need more supplies from Earth. The Prometheans won't appreciate being monitored by us, so probably the safest thing if you get to that point is to go back to the witnesses and let them know you need our help. We'll get in touch." Then he disappeared. "Well, that was a hell of a thing," M said. "What do we do now?" "I guess we unload the shipping container," I said. "I have some pretty cool books in there."